Today's graphic studies tutorial is going to focus on some Rhino modeling techniques that will hopefully assist you as you developed the work for the A6 assignment, as well as just in general modeling techniques that you can use to help develop your studio project. So in order for me to explain how I work, I needed to basically pretend as if I'm actually designing a project myself. And so what I basically did was I went into the Lafitte Greenway site and I drew this sketch here. This is where we're going to try to get to. We're going to try to get to something like this, a 3D model of the design. But I started in the same way that you all are starting right now. You have a base and you just sketch and you come up with a design concept. Like this is just a design. And that's kind of what you guys are at right now. Just you need to come up with a concept. So what you do is you take your concept and you bring it into Rhino and you just need to vectorize it. And also, just before I get into that, this model here, this is also where most of you should be at this point, which is you've created your export of your site model as a mesh into Rhino. And then basically what you do is you bring in your sketch, your concept, you kind of scale it, you bring it in as a surface image, and then you just need to draw a plan. You just need to look at the existing conditions, draw the line work for portions of the existing conditions that you're not going to change, and then draw your plan. And whenever you draw your line work for your projects, try your best to draw them neatly. What I mean by that is avoid just sketching freeform everything, but rather, draw center lines or draw edges and using offset tools or using fillets to create clean widths, nice clean radiuses, simple drawing techniques, lines and arcs. This is all on one layer and it's all on one plane. Nothing's in 3D yet. So how do you take this and turn it into a 3D model? So the first thing we need to do is we need to convert as many of these elements into solid geometry in the quickest, easiest way possible. First thing we'll do is first create a new layer in Rhino. I'll just call this hatch for now. And then I'll give it like a gray color, dark gray color. Select all of the lines that you want to use. And that's this area here, then type in hatch. And then we just simply click areas that we want to turn to solid, and make sure that this combine regions option in the command line is set to no, because that way when you actually click in areas that are adjacent, they don't merge. And then hit I think that's everything. Hit enter. Yep. So you have your hatches here. Now, one thing you'll notice is that I didn't hatch this part here, or I didn't hatch this path here. These elements there, you could consider as existing conditions. If I turn the existing conditions on, that's the existing greenway. And so this area here is our extents of work. And so you only need to model basically the extents of work. So one thing that we should do is we should take this mesh here and we cut a hole to represent the removal of the area that is the extent of work, and then everything else we just leave as is. Here's how we can do that. Go into this here, and instead of hatching everything, we're just going to create a little, I'm just holding shift and selecting a few curves. Just selecting a couple of curves that represent that extensive work, then type in hatch again. And now we just created one big hatch for the extensive work. And then this here, let me create a new layer. I'll call this extents. I'll change that to its own layer. Whenever you have a hatch that you want to convert into like actual curve, you take that hatch, you type in explode. Solid hatches that are exploded turn to surfaces. That's one of those secret techniques in Rhino that isn't explicitly obvious. And then this surface here, what we're going to do, I'm just going to bring it down a bit. Then I'm going to click it and type in duplicate border. So dupe border. And so then we can delete the surface because now we've basically created an outline of that extensive work. So that hatch tool that I showed you is super useful. You can basically grab large areas and create solid forms really quickly using the hatch. So we're going to take this portion of the InfWorks surface here. I'm going to take that curve that we had as the extensive work, and we're going to project it onto the mesh. So with the curve selected, I type in project, then click the mesh, then hit enter. And now you see that the curve is now projected onto that mesh. This curve, it looks like it's not joined. So what I will do is I would just select everything, hit J to join it. And if it's an open curve, so you click on the object and you see in the properties that says open, type in close curve, that just closes it. So now we type in mesh split, split this by that curve. And now this should be split. In my case, I grouped the mesh together. So I just type in ungroup. And now you should be able to take these elements here. And what I like to do is I like to, instead of deleting them, I just create a new layer. I'll call this like mesh hide. And then I just move that to that layer, change, hide that. So that's how you cut a project extents into your model. Now we can lock the ground layer, and now we can work within this LSP. Okay, so now we can go back to that hatch here, and now we can do the exact same thing with these hatches here. So what I'll do is I'll select the hatches, select objects, then we'll type in explode. This essentially now is your solid model that you can use. The only issue with this is that it's totally flat. We need to now begin to find ways that we can manipulate these geometries so that they are aligned with, like, say, for instance, right here, you can see like this, the existing terrain right there. This surface is not in plane with the existing terrain. So one technique that is a good starting point, just take these solid planes and just begin to move them to their proper elevation so that they can roughly represent the elevations that are close to finished grade. They're not going to be totally finished, but it's a good starting point is just to get this roughly laid out. You can just do that manually like I'm showing right here, just moving it up and down, or you can use a tool that I like to use, which is called SetPoint. SetPoint, so that's SETPT. You can basically project any geometry and set the Z elevation to be consistent across every aspect of that geometry. Only have set Z checked. Then if you click OK, now you can basically have this project to, say, for instance, a point along the perimeter of existing terrain. So the terrain is a mesh. So I check the vertex snapping option in the snapping tools down here. And now you should be able to snap to a point there. Or, for instance, right here, you can see that it's higher there. Maybe you want to snap it to that point there. So this is the first step, is just to kind of get everything aligned with the existing topography. It's a little bit hard to see. Let me go into viewport, display options, and I'm going to change the background to be darker, just so that's a little bit clear to see the gaps between the shape. Very clear that there is a gap between the surface and the actual finish elevation. Set Z, and then just click. Hopefully you see that once you get used to this, it's a very quick process to begin to align the surfaces to their close enough elevation to where they might be. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the trickier parts. Say, for instance, this path right here that we want to begin to align to the existing grade. What I recommend doing with paths is to kind of treat the paths as much as you can as single branches. Instead of trying to model this whole path system together, break it up into this leg here, that leg there, that leg there, that leg there, and then try to model those elements separately. So first thing we'll do, like I said, break it up. Click on this path here. I'm going to click on the polyline tool here, and I'm just going to draw, we'll call it a grade break right there. Type in split, then we're going to split that surface with that curve. So now we have a separate surface. And the grade break, again, that's a design decision. It could be right here. You can make it like right here if you want. That could be your grade break right there. So we'll split that with that. So we have this one and this one. For this curve right here, I'm going to show you a technique called cage edit. With cage edit, we basically need to create reference geometry that we use to manipulate the base geometry. I'm going to draw a line from the midpoint of the bottom to the midpoint of the top. That's going to be our reference geometry that we use to edit this here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this feature here and I'm going to type in cage edit. And then the first thing it asks for is a control object. That's going to be the line we just drew. And then it asks for a region edit. You choose this option called global. You can now manipulate that reference geometry, like just move it up. And the base geometry is linked to that. And so it's a very easy way to begin to, say, for instance, manipulate the elevation of the path. And so what I would do is at the end of this here, I would just simply select that endpoint there, type in M, then move vertical. So I'll type in V, enter, then just move that point vertically until you hit the nearest vertex. And so that's how you can get that path to basically slope from that elevation to that elevation. And then once you finish the cage edit, you can keep that reference curve if you want, or you just delete it if you don't need it anymore. Another technique you can use, and let's use it on this path right here, is using the solid control points option. So in the solid tab up here, the solid tools, there's a button here called turn on solid control points. Clicking that usually brings up the endpoints of the surface that you can manipulate. But one thing that you need to do is that the geometry that you generate via this method of hatch explode surface that I showed here doesn't actually have proper solid control points. So you need to actually rebuild these surfaces in order for this to work. It's a pretty simple technique. Basically, you click on the surface, you type in duplicate border, you delete that original surface, you click on that border, you type in planar surface, and now you have a surface again. And then you just delete the border that you used. And then if you click on that surface, you can use the solid control points. Hopefully you can see, turn on a, say for instance, a ghosted view. I hope you can see, like you can get the control points for that. And so now you can basically just move these control points individually to kind of get your surface to be flush with other paths. So what I would do basically is you click, say for instance, that point there, type in M, V, then move it vertically. Same thing here, V, like that. Then down here, click that M, V, up, M, V, up. Say, for instance, this is a play surface right here. And let's say we want to elevate that a bit. So I'm just going to move this up, say, for instance, 1 foot. So I'm going to choose that and just type in 1 using the gumball tool here, move that vertically 1 foot, just to give it a little bit more prospect. Let's say this portion of landscape right here, we want to begin to match the elevated play surface. What I would do is I would type in duplicate border to get the outline, delete the original surface, click on that border, type in planar surface, then delete that border. And now this, you can use the solid control points. You can see those little dots on the end there. Now you can use M, V, move it up. Let me do this path here. In this case, I'll demo the cage edit, but with a reference geometry one more time. So with this path here, you draw a reference curve from midpoint of the base to the midpoint of the top, type in cage edit, select the captive object, which is this here. You can select the control object here, then choose global. And then now you can manipulate this path in this method here. So this will just do hem V, move that up to the nearest vertex. Now we can take this portion here, M, V, move that to thing there. So hopefully you see that's how you can begin to model landscape to match your elevations of features. So I'm going to show you a really, really quick way to make stairs. So this here, we want to turn this slope into a stair. What I do, a quick, dirty way to create stairs. You click on a slope that you've modeled, type in contour, cut a contour from the bottom of the stair. So I'm just going to click somewhere on the base here and then contour it vertically. So when you click on the base point, asks for a direction perpendicular, go to a front view and then just hold shift right where the stair is, hold shift to make a vertical line. And then distance between contours is going to be 0.5. So then you've created like a series of contours like that. Then just split this surface using those lines. And then use the set point tool, set point, to set these to be the elevation of the contour, then give this some thickness. So extrude surface and extrude it by 0.5. So that's a quick way to create stairs. Now, obviously, the step riser to run ratio is completely arbitrary for this. That is fine. You can refine those small elements later in the design process, but what we just want to have here is just like a placeholder for stairs. Let me do that one more time. So go to an area with a slope and contour it from that point, base of the thing to that, then split using those. Then take each of the treads and just set them to be the elevation. Extrude surface 0.5. There you go. Before we go into the other model, let me show you seat walls real quick. The most easy way to model seat wall is just extrude the surface. So if this is, say, for instance, the first seat wall you wanted to extrude, just click on that, then type in extrude surface. And then when you extrude it, make sure it's a solid. Make sure you delete the input and then just set that to be a 1.5 foot elevation, because that's kind of like your standard seat wall height. And so we want to turn this into a really nice sculptural seat wall. So I'm going to show you a technique that I like to use. So we're going to take this base of a seat wall here. I'm going to type in duplicate edge, and I'm going to duplicate edge of this. And I'm just going to delete that. In this case, I just want to create two curves. So I'm going to actually delete the endpoints of this. So I'm just typing explode, then delete those guys. Then I'm going to join these together again. So type in J to join them. So we're going to create a seat wall that's kind of built between these two curves. And again, remember, at the very beginning of this whole process, this started as a dumb sketch. This is how design can evolve from the sketch to an idea. So I want to create a little bit of more of a profile to this seat wall here. So we need to be able to draw perpendicular to this curve here. With the way you do that is you type in C-plane. And when you type in C-plane, you can change the location of the drawing plane. What I'm going to do is in the C-plane options here, there's an option called curve. If you click on that, then you can click on a curve, and then you can see what's happening here is you can set the C-plane to be somewhere on the curve, and it's running perpendicular to that curve. Click somewhere on that curve. You've set the drawing plane to be perpendicular to that. I'm going to make this a nice hot pink so you can hopefully see it. Let me just do this real quick. I think the background black is now making things even harder to see. So I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to do application settings. So now with that C-plane set up, I'm going to now just draw a seat wall. So the first point of that seat wall is going to, say, for instance, be the midpoint or the origin point of that C-plane. So just type in 0 to start that. I'm going to draw a wall that's vertical 1.5. horizontal 2, and then back down, then back over. So we could just a little rectangle here. And then what you can do is you can take that rectangle there, type in points on. Now you can begin to modify it so that there's a little bit of a lip. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a lip on the other side, but maybe not so much. Sometimes what's nice in seat walls is to create reveals at the base of it. So there's a nice little shadow. And so what we can do is we can just simply create a little box here, then just use that box and this to trim out that reveal. Whenever you trim, just hit J to join them back together. And then also what's nice to do in seat walls is to create a nice little radius at the corner of this. So I'll type in fillet and we'll do a radius. So click on the radius tool in fillet and type in 1 inch. Then you can just do it again. With that all set up, now I can just simply do sweep. So we'll do sweep 1, allows you to click one rail and sweep a section along that just straight through it like that. And that's how you can create a very simple seat wall. Sweep 2 allows you to take 2. And so in this case, you might have a wall that tapers down. So we'll do sweep 2 in this case, because that's what I drew here. So sweep 2. So click rail 1, rail 2, and then the shape. Enter again. And you want to make sure that you check this maintain height option right here to make sure that the height is always the same across the entire seat wall. Then click OK. And there, now you've created a nice, beautiful seat wall. And then to do the other side, we just do the same exact tool, sweep 2, 1, 2, 3, enter, enter, enter. And then join these together, then cap it. Yeah, it capped. So that closes the ends. So now once you're done with the whole seawall, you want to reset the seaplane that you drew, because the seaplane it has served its purpose. So we just type in seaplane again, click on world, and click on top. That's the seaplane's now back home where it was originally. Now we can turn back on all the other layers that we had, mesh, road, everything else. So what you see on the screen here, this was the model that I built. It takes some time to get to that point, but it's not that hard once you get to it. One thing I wanted to quickly go over again, but how to begin to put textures onto the features of the project. But one thing I will make a note, you don't have to create a realistic looking rendering. If you want to go for something a bit more abstract or a bit more artistic, you can use this assignment to try that out. The easiest way to add materials to elements is to first organize the portions of your design into different layers, with each layering corresponding to a specific material. So let me just quickly show you guys what I did for this. There's path. And so, path might be some kind of concrete as an example, play surface, landscape, hardscape features, walls, wood, decking. So here's how you add textures is basically once you organize everything into a layer, what you do is in the layers panel on the side, you choose this material circle. If you click on that, you can set a material for that layer. What you would do is you go to the type right here, then choose custom. And now you can begin to configure a custom material. And so this path here, let's just call this one concrete walk for this example. And then you import the texture in this thing right here where it says color. You click on these little 3 dots, and then you go to your texture folder. And so you find a material that kind of represents what you're going for. Let's say like a concrete material, then click OK once you add that in there. And then you can sort of see now that the material has now been painted onto that element. So I'll just do that for a few of the other elements. So we'll do play surface. So again, custom, play surface, color, like a fun texture like this. A landscape with that, planting, custom, hardscape, paving, walls, concrete, custom, decking, wood decking, custom, decking texture. So adding texture is pretty easy once you start that. And then again, everything that you draw on these respective layers will inherit that texture. The other thing that we need to do is do texture mapping. What we do in order to do that is you click on, let's say, for instance, this paving layer right here. You can see the pavers are out of scale. What we'll do is we'll click on that there. Better maybe just to click on all the hardscape objects. So I right click on hardscape, select objects, and then go into the texture mapping button. So it's in the properties tab. And then there's this button that looks like a wallpaper roll. Click on that. And then you can establish a texture map on this. And so there's all these mapping options you can use here. There's planar mapping, surface mapping, box mapping. I'll show you planar mapping. So if you choose planar map, then draw like a box, and then hit UV in the options here. And you see now the map has changed. And so here's how I would go about this process. Once you've set the texture map, just click on the option again, then choose this show mapping button in the texture mapping options. That brings up that square that you just drew. Now you see if you move that around, it moves it with the map. And then you can scale this texture map to kind of get the texture to be the scale that is appropriate for this. You can even rotate the map as well to align it with, say, for instance, something. Maybe this is the preferred direction for this detail. And then once you have your map set up, then you just choose hide mapping, and that goes away. And then the next part is adding assets into the model. Create a new layer. Let's call this one Enscape 2. And I'll set that to be the current layer. And we're going to open Enscape, use the asset library right here. One thing that you should probably do, the first thing once you get your base model somewhat established, is just to go in here and find some scale figures to drop in the model. Once you put scale figures in the model, all of a sudden you understand what you're doing. The design makes sense or it doesn't make sense based on, the size of the scale figure in relation to the space. Like for instance, this play space right here, you can kind of get a feel from once you put some people in there, maybe put some kids in there. shrubs, trees, grasses. Once you add one element, sometimes it's easy just to copy and paste it a few times to kind of get a massing of planting. And also Enscape assets, they only attach to surface geometry. So you can't attach assets to the mesh. And so if you say, for instance, wanted to put like a person on the existing condition on the side here, you can click anywhere, it doesn't attach. So that is, if you remember in the last tutorial, we created these surfaces using the drape tool. Use that to help attach features to other sites. And then the surface tool is used pretty much for that. Then once you run Enscape, so choose Start Enscape, you can begin to see how the design begins to come to life through this modeling technique. If you hit the space bar when you're in Enscape, you can just drop it to the ground. And as you begin to walk through the landscape, you can begin to see how the work that you've put into the design can begin to feel like a space. And so now you can go in here, and then the fun part of design is now that you're at this scale, you can go and do more details. So maybe you need a curb here. Maybe you want to develop a jointing pattern in the concrete. Maybe, you want to create the steps that are a little bit more refined. Maybe you want to put some furniture out here. Being able to get into the model allows you to design in a different way than what you had in the plan view. Because now you can actually just like look at it and say, oh, okay, that's what it feels like for a path that wide to be. And here you can even see like I probably need a wall right there for this to work. At a large scale like this is, how you can begin to create those aerial views of your design. And even zooming out a bit more, you can begin to see how this fits within, the greater context of, in this case, the Greenway site. Last thing I'll show you is how you can actually create a section. I showed you guys that in the last tutorial, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more detailed with this workflow. So we need to create a layer called section surface, set that to be the current layer. I'm going to create a plane that we can use as like the section cut plane. So let's just do something like that for now, like that. And then we'll create another layer, call it clipping plane. I'll make that a hot pink, and then type in clipping plane, and then use the vertical clipping plane tool and just basically use this surface as kind of like your guide to get that plane. And now if you turn off that section surface, you can begin to see, this is where the section is cut. You can either have the view planar with the section plane, or you can just have it as a 3D. I'm going to show you a 3D version. That's because that's the version I had in my example. If you do a 3D view, I do recommend making the lens length a little bit more dramatic. So maybe take that and make it 25, and then pick the angle that you like. And then you save the view. So click on Save As in the name view window, call it section perspective there. One thing we're going to want to do is we're going to need to add like some dimensions and some annotation along the section line itself. And so here's how I recommend doing that. First, turning on that section plane here, and I'm going to create another layer, and actually I'm going to call this one section cut, and then set that to be the current layer. And then we're going to type in section, and we're going to cut a section through all of the stuff in the model. So I'm just going to kind of shift select things that you see. I'm not going to select the Enscape assets though. So I'm just going to lock the Enscape layer. And then I'm going to select these objects here. So these are objects we'll cut a section through, and hit enter. Then we're just going to click on actually do this before we might need to just turn off the clipping plane for now. So I'm going to click on the clipping plane, turn it off. And then I'm going to do section again, select objects, enter, and then now it's snapping to the plane. So I'm going to click. Now hopefully you see a section line has been cut in the model. And now we can go back to the section perspective view. You can turn off the section surface. And now there is a section cut layer that you can use as a reference to put dimensions on. So let's make this surface here our drawing plane. So type in C plane, and then choose, in this case, surface. And then you can click anywhere on the surface here. I'll just click on the corner. And then it's going to ask for like an axis. Just hold shift to set that axis. And now this is now set to be the C plane. So now when you draw a little sketch, I'll draw on this I'll create a new look. I'll call it like section annotation. It's the current layer. I'll make it red. Now when you draw on the space here, it's now on the section. Go to dimension, linear dimension, and you can begin to just like say, for instance, begin to full dimensions of elements of your design off of the model. And this usually needs to attach itself to some kind of thing that can snap to. So that's why we draw the section line to help us do that. Now you have a couple of dimensions that you can show in your model. So now you have your basic section kind of drawn. You can go back to that section perspective view that you saved, and we can render this out. So what I'll do is I'll open Enscape. Okay, so here's our Enscape view. Sometimes in Enscape, the section cut isn't showing. So the way to fix that is you click on the clipping plane and then go to properties and just check that a few times. And now you can see that it now cuts it in the Enscape view. And now we can go back to this view here. Now you can see this is the same view that we set up here, but now rendered. And this is where you can use Enscape and begin to give it some nice dramatic lighting. Like I said earlier, you don't have to create a textured model like I'm showing here. You can create something a bit more abstract. So maybe it's appropriate at this stage to just go in here and choose the white style as what you want to use. And then once you have your view, I like to check the save frame button there to know what is getting exported. Also go to visual settings here and make sure in the output you have a nice high resolution so that when you bring this into Photoshop, you're not working with low res images. So this is pretty high right here. That's good. And then just hit the screenshot tool there and then save it somewhere. I'll save it on my desktop. So it's exporting that out. Okay, it's finished exporting. So we're done with Enscape. We can close it. And then what I would do in Rhino is we export some line work out. So what I like to do is, this is my technique that I showed with A4. I'm going to show it again. So some of you might like this technique. Some of you might hate this technique, and some of you might really hate this technique. Here is how that works again. So you click on the layout tab, click new layout, call this one section, and we're going to do a 36 by 24 size. Printer is going to be PDF. Click OK. And so now we have a little page layout here. I'm going to take the frame here and just make it full bleed, then double click in there and we go to section perspectives, and that's the view. You can turn off any layers you don't need. So in my opinion, the Enscape assets are a distraction. So we just turn those off. We do want the dimensions. We do want the section cut. These meshes here in the background are probably too noisy and distracting. So we'll turn off the mesh layers there. And then I like to do this. These elements here and type in make 2D. We don't need scene silhouette. Clipping plane or intersection, we should have that checked, and then group output should be fine. We'll call this one section cut. Okay. And then in the top view, that's kind of like the line work for the section cut. So I'm just going to group that. Then I'm going to move it. So I'm going to cut that and then paste it in here. So again, this is my technique. I like to paste make 2D line work over the layout. Move this there, then scale it. So it kind of overlays that. And now this you can export out. So one additional trick that I do is you can select all of the geometry in the model and then go to properties, and then in display color, set that to be like a white color. That way, when you export this out and configure things in Illustrator, you can quickly remove the lines that are of this kind of like from the actual model that have all the UV geometry. Now you take this, print, and then print it as a PDF, vector output, make sure that's checked, and then choose print, section, demo. And then go to Illustrator, open, select, object, clipping masks, delete. Select everything, Control-Shift-G several times to ungroup everything. You can see that the geometric line work isn't actually clipped. So I just select all of that stuff there and I just delete that. Then you can begin to adjust the colors and the line widths for everything else. So I'm going to just do this to keep my life simple. I'm just going to select the line work for the dimensions, move that to a new layer, select the annotations, move that to a new layer, and then I'm going to select same stroke weight. Yep, and that gets me the section line itself. And then everything else, I'm just gonna select all that there and then set that to be like 0.5 with a black stroke. Then take the section line itself, give that like a 2-point stroke, make it black, then go to the dimensions here. So these dimensions here, just make them black, then go to the dimension leader lines, make that a 0.5 weight, make that dark gray, maybe give them a little bit of a dash, save as an Illustrator file, go to Photoshop, open rendering, and just go in here and begin to edit this to make it look good. So use those layers that come from Enscape to help, say, for instance, mask out other elements of the site, fuzz out the horizon a bit, maybe do a little bit of color correction. So go to image, auto color, and then trim transparent pixels, then do file, save as PNG. Okay, and then go back to Illustrator. You can just bring that in. Save as section, then go to InDesign. So that's kind of how you get your model into a format. And one thing I might recommend doing is, even though this is unfinished, just getting to this point of the drawing is helpful, because then you can begin to conceptualize, all right, this is what's missing, this is what I need to do, this is what I need to add to the model, because then you can begin to kind of understand how the design is being communicated effectively. Any final questions before I push my chair back and reveal what's been sitting on my lap this whole time? Oh, Mimi, she's sad because she's not in my lap anymore. So thanks, everyone. Goodbye, everyone.